Hello, my name's Rachel Fogarty. I live in New York City. I came here about 10 years ago and came here with my husband Kevin, who is a musical theater composer. We're both musicians, and we came here for him to write musical theater, and I tagged along and am currently a professional musician and composer, playing for various choirs and organizations, chamber music. And then I write some musical theater, and I also write choral music and chamber music, really whatever I get asked to do. And I'm in my early 40s.
Sweet.
There. Is that good?
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
So with writing music, everybody says as an artist that like you're your own worst critic. How do you go about, loving your work enough to share it with other people and just not letting those intrusive thoughts take over?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think the intrusive thoughts are the imposter syndrome, is what I call it, I guess. And we all think we're on the verge of being found out, to not be very good at what we're doing. I guess early on when I started writing, that was definitely a thing, where I felt like I needed to impress everyone and I needed to have the best music, and it needed to be innovative and creative and original. But what I've come to realize is that there's really nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Like, everything's been done to death. It's all been done before. But what makes a person's art unique is them. And so what really it comes down to is craft and excellence in the craft. And then learning how to bring your own twist to it. So that's what makes a person original, because we're all different. And we're all just have different ideas and expressions. And bringing those different ideas and expressions to the music will make it original, as opposed to trying to be original. So one of the ways that I quiet those is, like, not everybody's gonna like my music, and that's okay. They don't have to, because I don't like everybody else's music either.
Yeah.
So, like, it's a very subjective thing. But I can look at music and I can look at the craft of it, and I can objectively say this is good or bad based on the craft that's employed in putting it together. And so I also think part of this gets to identity a little bit. Like, what is our identity in? What are we resting in? Like, what makes our, I don't know how to say it, I guess, what are we trusting in to find our worth, I guess. And I think a lot of times what happens with artists is that we put our identity in our work, which makes it impossible to criticize. And it actually makes it harder for us to get better at our work, because we can't take criticism and we can't see it objectively. So part of that comes with, how can I hold this identity? I need an identity that isn't going to be crushed by other things. And so part of the question is, like, where do you find that identity? And for me, this is not everybody. For me, I'm a Christian, and so that identity I find in Jesus. And so for me, those things, my faith is what gives me the anchor to be able to face criticism in a way that doesn't destroy me.
So where do you find, like, your inspiration for your music, or if you're feeling down and you just need something to keep you going, like, what do you turn to, or what, like, activities you might do, anything like that?
Well, I love to sing. I'm not a great singer, but I love to sing. And I think part of, one thing I found about when I'm down or when I'm sad is singing and music in general is a way to like get the emotions out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when I was a kid, it was about I didn't have an outlet for emotions, and I didn't feel like I could have them. And so playing the piano became, Chopin and Beethoven and Mozart became ways for me to deal with the emotions that I had on the inside, and it just became a natural outlet to put them into space or into sound. And so I think writing music for me is one of those outlets of dealing with things. Is like if something's really hard, if I write about it, a lot of times it puts it back into perspective. And one of the things that I've actually recognized for me is I spent a lot of years thinking that I needed to pray more, or I needed to that prayer was going to be the answer for me. And I do think in some ways that that's important, or can be important. Like some people might have meditation practice, but I think that those practices for me are actually writing music or writing hymns. It's my prayer journal, or the journal and the diary with my deepest thoughts, are actually my music. Mm-hmm. And so those are the ways that I deal with existential questions, or or I deal with having a bad day, or all of those things. They go into the practice of writing. And then I do a lot of hymn writing or hymn setting, and so a lot of times those become my prayer journal, and the ways that I sing those things back to God. Mm-hmm. But I think that even secular people have those practices too, where they to get the answers to the existential questions, to have transcendent experiences. There's something about music that touches heaven and earth and gives meaning to people's lives in a way that sometimes other things don't.
Mm.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. So for some people who aren't like super religious, but maybe trying to like find their way, or they want to explore that more, like what kind of advice do you have?
Well, I guess, I think that there's one way to think about it. Like, I guess I'd push back a little and say that I think we all are religious in our way. In meaning that we all need meaning and look for meaning. And I think part of our culture right now, there's a meaning crisis. There's a guy, a philosopher and a social scientist named John Vervaeke, who talks about the meaning crisis a lot. And I think a lot of our search for meaning results in what I might call immortality projects, which Ernest Becker talks about that a little bit. Immortality projects where we're trying to create some kind of legacy that will outlast us, whether that be in our work or in our relationships or in our children. We all need something that is transcendent and not of this world. And so I think a lot of people who are non-religious may try to find those things in practices or in loving other people or relationships and connections with others. But I would also say that those things are transient and easily taken away. And so the question then becomes, how do you find meaning in a world that's always changing, and in a life that's always changing? Because nothing seems to be the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't ever stay the same.
Right.
And I think another thing I would say is I think a lot of us have an obsession with control, and trying to control our environments and to control our experiences, and that itself is what creates a lot of anxiety. I know it creates a lot of anxiety for me. And I assume I'm not alone in that.
Oh, 100%.
And so I think, there's an embrace that can happen of the world where we can recognize that the world can't be controlled, and that our need to control it kind of mutes it and makes it not transcendent, and removes the meaning it could have. And so I think one of the ways that all of us could think about it more frequently is how do we let loose of the control that we're trying to exert over our environments, and instead embrace disappointment and suffering, and recognize that those things aren't bad, that they actually can have meaning in our lives, and that they can produce character, and that they can produce good things in our lives. And part of life is suffering and learning how to suffer well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what got you to this point of like realization of all these things? Because I would love to know.
The realization of all these things? Well, I think part of it is just age. Like suffering through different things, watching other people suffer. I mean, like, it doesn't even have to, I think suffering, sometimes we try to pit it against each other and try to say like, oh, well, I haven't suffered as much as this other person. But suffering is still suffering. And like, even if you're trying to forgive somebody for something that they've done to you that was really terrible or painful for you, that's a form of suffering, because I have to absorb the cost of that forgiveness, to restore a relationship, or even to move on from that relationship, even if there isn't restoration possible. And so I think, I don't know, I think lived experience is some of that. But I also, again, don't think any of this wisdom is my own. Like, it's, I find the wisdom is a gift from God that God gives me in my faith. So, yeah, I think, I don't know if that helps. I feel like I'm...
Oh, yeah. No,
yeah?
You're good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have dramatic suffering necessarily. I've had terrible things happen, but there could always be worse things that happen to a person. But I think it's really it's maybe balancing expectation is part of it too. Is like, it's it's a lot harder if you go into a hotel room and they've been like, this place is a dump, and then you go in and it's actually quite nice. Then you expected a dump and it's a nice place, as opposed to, this is a honeymoon suite, and then you go in and it's really bad. Like, your expectations kind of set the tone for what comes after. And so I think managing expectations can be good, in the fact that, like, just expecting suffering to come and recognizing that it will come in some kind of form, and being prepared in advance and thinking about how you will handle it before it happens, as opposed to trying to handle it in the moment. Like, I think is helpful. Yeah.
And how do you best prepare for those challenges that will eventually come, especially when you don't know exactly what's going to happen? But how do you prepare within yourself for those challenges?
I think part of it is developing character. One is, what does a noble person look like? Like, what are the characteristics that I want to show up with in the relationships that I have today? Like, I want to be humble and loving and kind, and I want to be self-controlled, and I want to have joy and peace and patience. And I think those qualities are qualities that I can't generate within myself. I keep going back to faith, but I'm sorry.
Good.
That is like I'm sorry. That's my framework.
Yeah, many people are like that.
So those elements to me can't be self-generated. Like, I can't will myself to be more kind, and I can't will myself to love people. That has to be created and generated from a source that's outside of me. And so the way the Christian faith talks about it is I have to allow God to generate those things in my heart. So I need, not only do I need, I actually need a new heart, a new heart that has those qualities that is placed into me. And then I rest on somebody else who has, Jesus, who has done that thing on my behalf. So he is kind and loving and good. And therefore I am kind and loving and good because I'm resting in him, which is a different way of viewing the world, I recognize. But I also think a lot of our culture is shaped by those ideas. Our culture values love. The idea that love is love. Why do we value love so much? Why is love an ultimate good? Why do we tell people to love their enemies? Why is forgiveness important? Why are we always defending the weak and the vulnerable among us? Well, because all of those ideas are inherent in Christianity. And so I think part of dealing with suffering is developing those things in yourself, or allowing God to develop those in yourself. And then recognizing that those things will come out when the suffering comes, by recognizing that I'm not alone in the suffering, that I have somebody with me who suffered for me, and can hold me up in that. And also, I think realizing that there is meaning in suffering, not only in this life but in the next, that there's a record kept. Like, there's a psalm that talks about God keeping all of my tears in a bottle and remembering all of my tears, and that Tolkien, even in Lord of the Rings, talks about everything sad will come untrue. It's that idea that there's another reference in a book of the prophet Joel, where he talks about that the Lord will restore what the locusts have eaten. So there's just a hope, I think, that I have of, and that hope sustains me in suffering, because I believe that the things that I suffer and lose will be restored to me one day. And so those things are hopeful for me.
I love that.
Yeah.
I guess one of the last questions I could ask is just, do you have any book recommendations or song recommendations, just anything that you recommend to somebody who might need something to uplift them or motivate them? Or
oh goodness. So many books.
I know.
I love books.
I'm waiting to hear the whole list.
Well, so one of my favorite books the last year is by a philosopher named Hartmut Rosa, which is The Uncontrollability of the World, which is the ideas of control that I was talking about are mostly his ideas, not my own. I really like his book. I really liked Tom Holland's book Dominion this year, but that's quite a read and probably is a history book and not necessarily an uplifting read. Uncontrollability of the World definitely would. I'm looking at my bookshelf over here, which is full of wonderful books. I actually really love reading poetry, and so I'm going to recommend a poetry book, which is Wendell Berry. Mm-hmm. Anything by Wendell Berry. And there's another book that I really love that I want to go back and read again. It's a Frederick Beckner book called The Longing for Home. And it's just kind of a reflection on the idea of home and where we find our homes, and how often when we come back home it doesn't feel like home anymore. Mm-hmm. Like it's changed and we don't know what to do with that. That's one of my favorite ones. mostly because I think it just normalizes that as a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of our work is feeling like, oh, I'm weird for feeling this way, but you aren't. It's a universal experience to feel homeless. So there's that one. Music wise, I love Vaughan Williams' The Lark Ascending. It's one of my all-time favorite classical pieces of music. I really like that book, or that music. I'm a huge Nickel Creek fan. I love all of their songwriting. Bluegrass
Yeah.
band. And then what do I listen to when I'm down? Jazz.
You like jazz.
Cyril Amaya is one of my favorite jazz artists. She's French. I hope I said her name right. I saw her at Lincoln Center do a thing with Wynton Marsalis and on Sondheim stuff, and that was really great.
That's cool.
It was a really cool show. It's one of my favorites that I've ever seen in New York. I really want the Frisk to bring back this exhibit that they had on unfinished art.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it was an entire exhibit of unfinished art, and it was one of my absolute favorite exhibits I've ever seen. Just various pieces, not completed, just kind of shows their different practices and process. That was really cool. That's right. Pretty much any music that I find, I find that to be a real balm a lot. Like if I'm super restless, I will often listen to songs. Classical music, I love hymns, but I recognize that I find the words of hymns to be very soothing too. But yeah. I was trying to think if I had any other books, but yeah, I think that's it. That's good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for chatting.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, of course.